Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. In John chapter 19, we read about Jesus's burial. Jesus in his crucifixion found shame, and people despised him and spit on him and rejected him. But we see him being dealt with in a very tender way in his burial. We see him having this mixture of myrrh and aloes being brought to him by Nicodemus, about 100 litras or 100 pounds, probably about 75 pounds in our rendering, but nonetheless, a lot of spices being brought to make sure that Christ's body would not stink, but would put forth this beautiful, sweet smelling aroma. We see him also being bound in linen wrappings, being wrapped up properly by these linen wrappings with the spices. And then also he was placed in a garden where there was a new tomb in which no one had been laid, basically a rich man's tomb. And it was in the midst of this wonderful garden. And so we have Jesus being basically placed in these spices with this linen sheets and then in the garden. And as we think about all these different things, we can look at our own lives, spiritually speaking, and see these same things being brought out in a certain degree. We too have been buried with Christ, as Romans chapter 6 talks about. Our old self was crucified with him, but we have been buried with him through baptism, and we have been basically brought into a state of death with Christ, where we have died to our old self to be raised to walk in newness of life. But in this burial, we have these various aspects. We too have basically these sweet spices placed on us. In other words, we have the sweet aroma that Christ had in a certain sense. And we read about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, where it talks about we have the aroma of Christ. He says in verse 15, "For we are the fragrance of Christ to God among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing. To the one an aroma from death to death, and to the other an aroma from life to life. And who is sufficient for these things?" We have the aroma of Christ. As we're going out and living the life of Christ, as we're teaching the words of Christ, it's like an aroma is being emitted from us. For some, that's going to lead them into life. They're going to hear the message. They're going to see the life that we're living. They're going to be drawn to that, and they're going to find life in Christ. For others, they're going to see that and be resistant to that, and it will be aroma to death. But in either case, we are emitting a certain aroma, a sweet smelling aroma, the aroma of Christ, metaphorically speaking. But then also we have the linen wrappings. And the linen wrappings can symbolize for us the righteous acts of the saints. In Revelation chapter 19 and verse 8, in talking about the church, it says, "And it was given to her to clothe herself in fine linen, bright and clean, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints." And so we, as we are buried with Christ, we then engage in these righteous acts, living a life of righteousness before God, emitting this beautiful aroma of Christ, but at the same time, engaging in the righteous acts of Christ. And then it talks about how Jesus, in his burial, was placed in a garden. And for those who have been buried with Christ, who have experienced a spiritual life in connection to Christ, we know that the experience is much like a garden. In a sense, we get to go back to the Garden of Eden, in which we have fellowship with God, communion with God. We have this beautiful experience of life and beauty. And it's as though our soul is basically placed in this garden setting, in which everything is beautiful and lovely, as we behold the beauty of the Lord, and as we walk before him in connection with him and in fellowship with him, we are placed in a garden. And so these various aspects of Jesus' burial can apply to us spiritually. We are emitting the fragrance of Christ. We are also engaged in the righteous acts of the saints, but we're also living in a state of gardenhood, so to speak, in which we are living a life embedded in beauty, embedded in the wonderful, lush life that Christ has given us. And all these things are our experience as we are buried with Christ. As we think about us being crucified with Christ, perhaps some negative things come up. We think about the things we have to deny ourselves of, we have to do away with. But in the burial, we see that beautiful things come out of dying with the Lord. This beautiful aroma, this fine linen sheets, this garden. These things show us beautiful things that can come out of a life that has been committed to death with Christ. And so let's be encouraged to live out our death with Christ, to remember that we have been buried with Christ, and that it ought to be that all these various aspects of his burial, in a sense, ought to be expressed in our lives, so that we can bring glory and honor to the Father. So these are some things we can reflect on and think about as we do our reading today. With that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.